So I recently sold my Arcade1Up Marvel Pinball Machine, and while I had it, I put a solid 30 hours of gameplay into it. I found some tables that I really liked, some that were real stinkers, and others that really caught me off guard and surprised me. In this video, I'll rank all the tables from 1 to 10, telling you why I preferred some tables over others. So sit back and enjoy my table ranking of the Arcade1Up Marvel Pinball Machine. So starting us off on the bottom of the list is Civil War, and this you would think would have a lot of potential, but unfortunately it just doesn't do anything for me. It has the overall worst appearance of all the tables, with bottom of the barrel graphics, resolution, and color. On top of that, the table only utilizes about 60% of the screen, with way too much dead space at the bottom and especially top of the screen. The table layout itself is tied for worst of the 10 games on my list. I feel like all you ever are doing is hitting the ball up and down ramps, which is fine, but gets repetitive. As far as gameplay, the bumper action is probably average, the multi-ball action is alright, and the music is also pretty average. There are missions for the table, but I just never found them enjoyable. Bottom line is that this table is hard to look at and is just not fun to play. If you enjoy this table, then more power to you, but I'd suggest staying away and trying something else. At number 9, I have Ghostwriter, and this may have been the most disappointing table out of the 10. I know on Pinball FX3 this is a really good looking table, but here the graphics are probably worst of all the tables. The colors, especially on the flames, is so washed out that it just ruins the experience. The table does at least utilize a bit more of the screen, but unfortunately there isn't a whole lot going on. I have it ranked at the bottom of the list as far as bumpers and overall fun factor. It does have some of the better music of all the tables, but that will be based off of preference. The missions are pretty average, and the utilization of the shotgun is probably one of the coolest aspects of the table. I just feel when I'm playing this table that all I end up doing is hitting Mephisto. This table started at my top 3, but the more I played it, then the further and further it worked its way down in the rankings. At number 8 I have Venom, which is another one of the tables that started high on my list, but then worked its way down the more that I played it. Just having SpiderMan, Venom, and Carnage all on the same table is a good start. As far as appearance goes, the color and graphics aren't horrible in comparison to some of the others, but I feel like the resolution on the table is some of the worst. The table does use more of the screen than some, but still only utilizes about 75% of it. So overall appearance is probably a little bit above average, all things considered. Where it starts to see some of its issues is in the table's layout. I have the bumpers tied for worst of all the tables, and the pacing of the table overall just feels slow. There is some pretty solid multi-ball action on the table, and some of the missions are pretty fun. I bounce between this being the number 7 and number 8 table on the list, but I landed at number 8 due to the music and the sound effects, which I really don't care for. So at 7 I have Wolverine, and just had recently swapped it out with the Venom table right before making this list. The Wolverine table does have some of the worst graphics out of any of the tables. The resolution is subpar as well, and they used way too much yellow on the table. I get it, Wolverine wears yellow, but they needed to add a different color here for a bit more contrast. This is also another one of the tables that only utilizes about 60% of the screen, which is a bummer. So overall the appearance of the table is not so great. As far as gameplay goes, it's pretty average. I mean, the missions are alright, but not great. The overall table layout is decent enough. So overall, it's just a pretty average table. What became the deciding factor and gave it the nudge over the Venom table was the fact that it had much better bumpers, and I like bumpers, so there you go. Alright, so there is a pretty big separation between the top 6 and the bottom 4 in my opinion. That starts with a large jump from number 7 to number 6, and at number 6 I have Fear itself. This table I started off initially liking, then it dropped pretty far down my list, but then it started making its way back up as I played it more. The resolution and graphics for the table are not the worst, but they aren't good either. However, they do a great job of using a diverse set of colors for the table. The table does a better job than most, using probably 80% of the screen. There are several characters on screen, and it really makes the table feel very alive. So overall, the appearance is pretty solid. The table layout is slightly above average. It utilizes ramps and rails pretty good, as there are just enough without having too many of each of them. I feel like there is some slight pacing issues, but nothing too horrible. The missions are pretty solid. It has good multi-ball action. The bumpers are actually top 3 in my opinion, and the music is pretty average. So overall, this table is a lot of fun. There are better, but like I said, a pretty significant jump from the number 7 table on this list. So to the better half of the tables on the Marvel Pinball Machine, we have X-Men at number 5. When I totaled up the score, this was actually tied with Fear itself, but I went ahead and gave it the slight edge just because it's X-Men. Now oddly enough, I think this table has some of the worst graphics of any table. However, the resolution and color is better than most. The overall appearance of the table is pretty good, but there is quite a bit of dead space on the screen that is disappointing for sure. As far as table layout and gameplay, there are some pacing issues, but overall the table is a lot of fun. The missions are really fun, the multi-ball action is really solid, the music is good. I feel like they have a bit more ramps than I'd like, but it doesn't ruin it for me. However, the one thing that holds this back is the bumpers. Like I've already stated, I like me some bumpers, and this table has by far the worst bumpers of all 10 tables. I did initially have this as a top 3 table, but the lack of good bumpers really irritated me after time. Overall, this is a solid table and a lot of fun. At number 4, I have Marvel's Woman of Power, A-Force, or titled for short, just A-Force. And this, just being honest, when I looked at the table lineup initially for the Marvel Pinball Machine, I was just asking myself, why did they put this table on here instead of some other Zen Studios Marvel tables? However, after I gave it a chance, I realized that this table is actually a lot of fun. To start with, I believe that graphically, it's the best table. The colors used are better than average, although the resolution is still poor, as is the resolution for every table on the machine for that matter. The overall appearance of the table is pretty nice, but the one thing that is hurting is the dead space. When you take into consideration the dead space below and above the table, then I'd be surprised if this actually used even 60% of the actual screen. Now on the flip side, it utilizes that 60% very effectively, as it scores above average on the missions, bumpers, music, and just overall fun. The fact that I'm not a huge fan of Black Widow and I don't even know who this other girl from Hydra is, and I still like the gameplay of this table so much, is really saying something, and I would give this table a try if you simply overlooked it because of its title. Moving into the top 3, we have the Fantastic Four table. This was another table that I was not too hyped for going in, but it won me over the more that I played it. The graphics on this table are pretty poor, but it has better resolution and color than most of the other tables. So overall appearance of the Fantastic Four table is pretty good. It suffers from too much dead space, as do many of the tables, but it seems that a lot of that is on the bottom of the screen as opposed to the top of the screen. As far as the gameplay of the table, its low points would have to be its music and bumpers. It's below average in both those categories. However, it makes up for that in the general table layout and game pacing. The missions are also some of the best of any table, and overall the table is just a heck of a lot of fun. I actually had this table tied with A-Force as far as scoring, but gave the nod to the Fantastic Four table simply because of the fun factor. At number 2, we have the Amazing Spider-Man, or known simply as the SpiderMan table. Being that this is really the featured table on this machine, it's probably not shocking to see it this high on the list. I was rooting for one of the underdogs like A-Force or Fantastic Four to edge it out, but it just didn't happen. I think this table has the best color of all the tables, so it makes it stand out. Unfortunately, the graphics and resolution are some of the worst, as the table is riddled with jaggies all over. But even with these issues, it's still probably one of the best looking overall tables. It utilizes about 75% or more of the screen, so that also gives it an edge over most tables. The gameplay for the table is overall pretty solid. The table layout is pretty diverse, but I feel that there is way too many rails on the table, which affects the overall pacing of the game. The gameplay also has some of the best bumpers of all the games, which is a huge plus for me. The only thing about the gameplay that I don't like is the missions. I personally think it has some of the most boring missions out of all the 10 tables. This holds it back from being my favorite table, but the great music along with a lot of the other solid aspects makes this table still better than most. Now for my favorite table on the Marvel Pinball Machine, I have Thor. And yes, Thor is my favorite Marvel character, so it's possible that I'm biased here, but I really do like this table. It has a lot to offer. Let's start with the graphics, resolution, and color of the table. It is really pretty average in all these categories. I mean, it doesn't really stand out as being good or bad in any of those departments. Similar to the SpiderMan table, it utilizes probably 70% of the screen, which is more than most tables. So I guess you could say that the overall table design is just a bit above average. The gameplay is what really sets this table apart from the rest. The general table layout is diverse, and the pacing is probably better than any other of the tables. The music is also pretty solid, but not the best. However, the bumpers and missions I believe are better than any other table, which is what makes this table so much fun to play. While I own this machine, then this is by far the table that I enjoy the most. And I'm not going to lie, I really miss having it. Even with its graphical issues, it is just a blast to experience, and outranks my number 2 table by quite a bit. So that is it for my ranking of all 10 tables on the Arcade1Up Marvel Pinball Machine. Let me know in the comments what has been your favorite table on a machine. Like always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.